this production is going to be about bubbles. Bear with me. It's no secret that I am a comments addict. Though I never respond to comments directly, mostly because I view text as a horrendous form of communication, I always adore to read what you all have to say, whether positive or negative. But I've noticed that the number one critique that I tend to receive is my thoughts on individualism versus collectivism. And so today, I thought I'd try to put an end to this debate once and for all. Let's start off right at the beginning. What is individualism? What is collectivism? And most importantly of all, what's with all these bubbles? Individualism and collectivism are two diametrically opposed viewpoints to life. Individualists believe that the sovereignty of the individual is far more important than the interests of the collective. On the contrary, collectivists believe that the interests of the collective are far more important than the sovereignty of the individual. Essentially, they're polar opposites. Whereas individualists value independence, wanting to be free from societal responsibility, collectivists value interdependence, whereby it is expected they can rely on others and others can rely on them. Whereas individualists believe in personal precedence, believing that their goals are far more important than that of any wider group, collectivists believe in group precedence, with their goals either being aligned or overwritten by their wider group. Whereas individualists are governors, believing that their own freedom, desires and lifestyle choices are paramount, collectivists are governed, having a sense of duty to their wider group and following a set of social obligations as such. It can often be quite difficult for people to know whether they prefer individualism or collectivism, as they don't exactly fit into the typical left-right dichotomy. As people who are socially left-wing, such as progressives, would be considered individualists, but so too would people who are economically right-wing, such as capitalists. Likewise, people who are socially right-wing, such as conservatives, would be considered collectivists, but so too would people who are economically left-wing, such as socialists. Some unlikely alliances, to say the least. Out of curiosity, I did a poll where I asked you all, are you an individualist or a collectivist? And the results were quite a pleasant surprise. 64% of you identified as collectivists, with just 36% identifying as individualists. I say these results are a pleasant surprise because I too am a fanatical collectivist. In fact, I would even go so far as to say that individualism is a cancer upon mankind. Harsh words. But what's so bad about individualism? Or perhaps an even better question, what's so good about collectivism? Well, it's actually really simple. Individualism is artificial. Collectivism is natural. Whenever we humans are on our own for too long, we feel pain. Not physical pain, but a mental pain. Loneliness. Everyone, at some point in their life, has felt lonely, whether for friendship, romance, or something more. Ever since we humans were in our genesis, we have always worked in groups, mostly as a means to maximize our survival by pooling our talents together as one cohesive unit. We prosper the most when surrounded by others as part of a group that is much greater than ourselves. This is how we were designed to be. We weren't designed, however, to roam around on our lonesome, to spend our lives stuck within our own heads, to prioritise the me over the we. And yet, that is exactly what most people in the Western world now do. We can't really talk about individualism versus collectivism, however, without acknowledging the fact that individualism is for the most part a Western phenomenon. The US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, UK, and other Northern European countries are individualistic, whereas the rest of the world is collectivistic. The USA is inarguably the most individualistic country on the planet, strongly valuing freedom of the self above any collective identity. On the contrary, China is perhaps the ultimate example of a collectivist country, with their citizens willingly sacrificing some individual sovereignty for the good of the wider society. Granted, these are both very extreme examples. Perhaps a better comparison would be over here in Europe. Most people know of the European west to east economic divide, with the west being much more wealthier than the east, but not many know of the European north to south cultural divide. By European standards, northern countries, specifically those in Scandinavia, are extremely socially individualistic, whereas southern countries, such as those by the Mediterranean, are notoriously socially collectivistic. This map shows the percentage of people between the ages of 25 to 29 who still live with their parents. As you can see, in every single Scandinavian country, this number is in single digits. Meanwhile, most Mediterranean nations have a massive supermajority. Contrary to popular belief, this isn't just because of economic reasons, it's also cultural. Are you a Greek grandfather who's getting old? Well, don't worry, pal, cause the fam has your back. Wait, what? You're Norwegian? Then get in the car home. Take it from me. If you had an Italian friend and visited their family, the chances are that they'd shower you with food. But if you had a Swedish friend and visited their family, then you would be lucky to get a crumb. That wasn't a joke. If you don't believe me, feel free to go to your search engine of choice and type in "Swedes don't feed guests," and you'll see that they really don't. And not only that, but they see no problem with it. If you've ever wondered why the governments of Scandinavian countries are renowned for shamelessly selling out their own citizens, or why Mediterranean nations are notorious for arguing with each other over the most mundane of disagreements, well, now you know why. It's the difference between a socially individualist culture and a socially collectivist culture. Individualism, in the grand scheme, is a relatively recent phenomenon. All countries that are now individualist did in fact used to be collectivist. So what the hell happened? Well, I'm gonna need some Deus Ex music for this one. The rise of individualism in the West can primarily be traced back to two big events: World War II and the Cold War. As established earlier, both conservatives and socialists are independently collectivist by nature. However, the brutality of the Axis powers in World War II essentially made social conservatism a taboo in the Western world. And likewise, the defeat of the Soviet Union in the Cold War had the exact same effect in regards to economic socialism. This is why, whenever a conservative in the West complains about something like immigration, they unjustly get accused of being some sort of stormtrooper of hate. Likewise, this is also why whenever a socialist in the West desires for something like universal healthcare, they unjustly get accused of being some sort of communist who wants to bring back breadlines. The West, so horrified by both fascism and communism, fully embraced the opposite of both and crafted a new ideology: neoliberalism, made up of the unusual combination of social progressives and economic capitalists, who, as stated earlier, just so happen to both be individualistic. And so today, the Overton window, aka views that are considered acceptable, is skewed incredibly far left socially and incredibly far right economically. This is increasingly obvious in nations that have a first-past-the-post voting system, like the UK and USA, whereby the two main parties, despite having opposing rhetoric and appealing to vastly different people, ultimately are borderline the same thing. Right-wing parties will promise social conservatism, such as family values and the return of basic moral decency, but when actually elected, will just focus on free market crony capitalism as a means to distract their voters. And it's been like this ever since the 1950s. Likewise, left-wing parties will promise socialist economics, such as fixing housing and the nationalisation of certain industries, but when actually elected, will just focus on hardcore social progressivism as a means to distract their voters. And it's been like this ever since the 1990s. So essentially, it doesn't really matter who wins, as both parties are now identical in all ways that matter, that being that they are both individualistic. Earlier, I described individualism as a cancer, and that's not a metaphor that I used lightly. When people get cancer, cancerous cells within their body start to rapidly multiply as time passes, until it gets to the point whereby the body can no longer cope, and unless treated, dies. Likewise, society can survive a small number of individualists, but when there's too many self-serving people, then society stops being a cohesive unit and essentially ceases to exist. And that's exactly what's happening in the Western world today. Social progressivism has been taken to such an illogical extreme that we now have a total decay of basic moral decency. Likewise, economic capitalism has also been taken to an illogical extreme, which has led to the rich getting unbelievably wealthy at the cost of everyone else. This is the world that individualism created. People who worship on the altar of individualism seem to be under the delusion that collectivists want to create some sort of utopian society, where people have no individual autonomy at all, like some sort of cog in a machine. What these people don't quite realise is that they're wrong. Collectivism doesn't just mean being told what to do by others. On the contrary, it simply means recognizing that the entire world doesn't revolve around you. That you are in fact part of a greater society, and as such you have certain duties and obligations towards others within it, and likewise that others have certain duties and obligations towards you. In this current decadent version of the West, we live in such a self-obsessed narcissistic fashion that many people struggle to comprehend what this even looks like. And so this is where the bubbles come in. In order to get people to understand what collectivism actually entails, I've created a framework that I call the 5 bubbles. Here's how it works. Here is Bob. As you can see, Bob is a very sad individual because he's, well, on his own. If he wants to be happy, then he's going to need some meaningful company. A bubble is a representation of that company, a group of people to which Bob can feel as if he belongs. The smaller the bubble, the less people and thus more intimate such company will be. The larger the bubble, the more people and thus less so. There are 5 bubbles, and the more of these bubbles Bob finds himself in, the happier he will be. But what are these 5 bubbles? Well, let's start with the first and smallest bubble, that being the fiancé. It kind of goes without saying that being in a relationship is incredibly important for human beings. A man on his own is nothing. A woman on her own is nothing. It's only when we complement each other do we truly feel complete. It's not just poetry when people refer to their partner as their other half. Men and women fundamentally complement each other, physically, mentally, and spiritually. Like yin and yang, such relationships are the ultimate synchronization of the masculine and feminine, a beautiful balance of our nature. The fiancé bubble is small, being just between 2 people, but it is by far the most intimate. When synced with another person on such a deep level, our own wants and desires become somewhat secondary. Instead, we drive throughout our life's journey on the same road, willingly sacrificing for one another to the best of our ability, to build a shared future that we can both enjoy. That is a form of collectivism. Which brings us on nicely to the second bubble, family. There are 2 types of families. First, the family we are born into, our alpha family. Here we have our mother, our father, and us. Hell, maybe even some siblings too. Or not. What a tragedy. Eventually, however, we go on to forge our own family, our beta family, whereby we now play the role of the parents for our own sons and daughters. Gotta make up for it somehow. When people reproduce, the priorities of their life completely transform overnight. Parents toil away for their young, trying their best to ensure that their childhoods are better than theirs was, while disciplining them well towards a better future. Sometimes it might not be easy, as they may not appreciate their efforts or truly understand just how much they mean to them. That is, of course, until many years later, when they are put in the exact same situation, whereby only then do they reflect back and appreciate just how much they tried for them. That is a form of collectivism. Bubble number 3. Friends. As stated earlier, we humans are tribal creatures. It's through our interactions with others that we don't just learn about them, but also learn about ourselves. Our friends shape us by sharing their lives, just as we shape them by sharing ours. Our most cherished memories throughout life are never on our lonesome, but on the contrary, with those to whom we can look in the eyes with great comfort. We don't have to know anyone, but we all want to, because our allies give us confidence, the strength in numbers to conquer life's problems while flourishing in its joys. That is a form of collectivism. Bubble number 4. Flag. A nation-state is more than just a flag, an anthem, mere lines on a map. It's home. To feel as if you belong as a valued citizen of your country is a quality of life upgrade beyond comparison. Everyone wants to live in a nation whereby they can be proud to wave its flag, to know that its government has your interests at heart, and perhaps most importantly, to know that your fellow citizens have your back. In a state like this, tax becomes less of a burden and more of an honour, a mutually beneficial transaction of trust. That is a form of collectivism. And lastly, the final and largest bubble of all, faith. In Islam, every year, millions of Muslims from around the world perform a pilgrimage known as the Hajj to the holy city of Mecca. Here, people from all walks of life, young, old, male, female, white, black, poor and rich, walk on the same path, rotating around the Kaaba, the direction in which all Muslims pray, the holiest site in Islam. They are not united by their earthly life, but their belief in the afterlife. One community under God. It is these spiritual bindings that provide those believers therein with a sense of purpose beyond the humdrums of daily life. A feeling of hope, order, and perhaps most importantly of all, belonging. The mere fact that billions of people around the world, who on paper have little in common with each other, can all be united in such a way, is well and truly mesmerizing. That is a form of collectivism. Fiancé, family, friends, flag and faith. These are the 5 bubbles, and the more bubbles you find yourself in, the happier you shall be, as part of a collective. But if you find yourself in no bubbles, then you will be just an individual, lost, lonely, and vulnerable in a very big world. Which is exactly what happens in our current individualistic society. I don't know if you've noticed yet, dear viewer, but if you were to analyse our current decadent Western society that is wholeheartedly ruled by individualism, then you will find that belonging within any of these bubbles, by today's standards, is a borderline impossible task. Fiancé? What fiancé? Despite being more interconnected than ever, for most people, meeting others has now become more of a burden than ever. Some people now even attempt to desperately sell themselves on degenerate dating apps, as if there's some sort of product that can be bought. Even if people get in relationships now, many don't even understand the meaning of marriage. A large group of men and women today have been conditioned from birth to act as self-centered narcissistic trash, fearful of loyalty and basic commitment, with some even stooping so low as to commit sacrilege via so-called open relationships, whereby in their selfishness they deface not just themselves, but more importantly, those they claim to love. A truly sad display of individualism. Family? What family? Many couples today tend not to breed at all, instead viewing intercourse as a mere recreational act and preferring to kill their own kids rather than raise them. Granted, when the workforce has been purposely enlarged and wages have been purposely stagnated, providing for even just one child often proves to be a borderline impossible task. Yet, rather than be defiant to destroy the system that's wronged them, they instead just embrace their lack of generational duties with open arms, simulating the family they failed to make with cute, fluffy animals. A truly sad display of individualism. Friends? What friends? Most people now refer to others as friends, despite the fact they've never even laid eyes on each other. Separated in all ways that matter, we now have a global brotherhood of faceless faces and voiceless voices. Mere avatars and text, revealing just enough about themselves to simulate relations, but never enough as to form true bonds. Fearful of the potential fallout. And as interacting with others is now so easy, most friendships have become merely superficial, short-lived, and pragmatic in nature. If you truly want to know whether someone is your friend, then undergo what I like to call the wedding test. If you had a wedding next week, would they be there? If the answer is yes, then they're a friend. But if the answer is no, then they're not. And the sad part is, most people know that their so-called friends would not. A truly sad display of individualism. Flag? What flag? Who would salute the flag of a nation that allows millions of its own children to get raped and live in poverty? Who would join the army of a nation that fights wars in which the soldiers don't even know what they're fighting for? Who would claim pride in a nation whereby its citizens are forced to beg in food banks just to stay alive? Very few people today are patriotic about their nation, and really, who can blame them? Whereas throughout history the nation-state stood as a community, today they have devolved into becoming a mere empty husk that stands for nothing. A soulless land where anything goes and everything is for sale. A truly sad display of individualism. Faith? What faith? Many now see themselves as above religion, enlightened New Age geniuses who have no need for the concept of God. After all, why should they worship Him when they can instead just worship themselves? Of course, as per human nature, this cult of the self merely ends up becoming a pseudo-religion in of itself, though rather than celebrating positive values, instead celebrates negative values that lead one down a path of pure destruction. Either that, of course, or they instead pursue a fake faith, such as warped paganism or star signs, which provide the illusion of spirituality without having to put any actual effort into it. A truly sad display of individualism. The consequences of this disgusting individualism bursting our collectivist bubbles is that most people now find themselves completely disenfranchised with their lives. They know, deep down, that something's wrong, that this is not how people are meant to live. But because it's all they've ever known, they don't know what, exactly, is the problem. Well, I'll tell you, individualism is the problem. An interesting observation I've made is that men and women tend to respond very differently to not belonging to any collectivist bubbles. And believe me when I say, they aren't good responses.
Try not to Fortnite Dance Challenge.
Level expert.
The man-child. Whereas man's nature is typically quite outgoing and daring, without belonging to any collectivist bubbles, men seem to have a massive sociability decrease, whereby they stop caring about the greater society at large, and instead become very isolationist, warding themselves off in their man caves from any potential harm. They typically spend their time endlessly consuming products to distract themselves, such as playing video games and watching anime. If you know of my Hexagon matrix framework, then they fit right in the empty category. Gaming chair with a cushion on the head? Overpriced $100 RBG keyboard? More monitors than a NASA space station? Anime woman as their desktop background? An internet history that would make their parents throw them out? And I'm not even going to talk about Funko Pops, as they deserve their own episode. I call them man-childs, as that really is what they are. Physically, they are men, but mentally, it's like they're still boys. They tend not to have any responsibilities, and thus never matured to act as such.
I'm a fully grown adult who received a very large box in the mail. I have no regrets, and love my spaceship.
Well, that's normal. When you have legions of grown men watching cartoons designed for little girls, you know beyond any reasonable doubt that you live in a dying society. It's almost like, in order for men to care about society, they actually have to have a stake in the society. Duh! I mean, Jesus Christ, how obvious is that?
Why are young men clocking out of society? We just can't figure it out.
Oh gee, I don't know, man. Could it possibly be that men struggle to find relationships, can't afford to start families, don't know how to make friends, are demonized by their governments, and have no role models of faith?
No, it's toxic masculinity.
We wish them well.
Just want to show my followers an example of a source never to cite, okay? Exhibit A YouTube video that blames the collapse of society and all the chaos that we're seeing today on feminism, on the rise of the feminist movement, okay? Gender relations, class relations, family systems, the lack of fathers, absentee fathers, the rise of the prison industrial complex, issues in economic collapse, the birth rates declining, to blame it all on feminism? This is your logic that there is one cause, and it's women wanting independence and to change gender relations, and that's gender relations was the thing that broke the camel's back in this society? You really believe that?
category. I honestly think it's some sort of deep biological imperative. It's like the men are too busy dressing up as ponies and playing World of Warcraft, and so the ladies can instinctively tell, oh crap, society is about to collapse. So as a last-ditch effort, they go overboard and try to mother society at large, just as they would their own children. Obviously, it doesn't work, as they typically keep voting for the same individualist policies that are directly contributing towards the societal decline in the first place. But besides the point, it's an interesting, if not disturbing, phenomenon regardless. We wish them well. To conclude, the individual is nothing without the collectives to which they belong. As such, the common interest of the masses must always reign supreme over that of any mere digit. Otherwise, well, look around.
How does the collective physical, mental, and spiritual well-being of society affect you in any way?
Ugh, shut up. We've overdosed on individualism so much that we now have some people who actually think they have a human right to murder the children that they chose to make. At the same time, corporations are now valued in the trillions, while the poverty level of the average Joe is skyrocketing. Individualism really is the devil in disguise, presenting itself as a virtue, but in reality is naught more than an excuse. An excuse that hardcore progressives use to warrant their selfish life choices, and crony capitalists use to warrant their insatiable greed. It says a lot when individualism has its own Wikipedia page, yet collectivism does not. How ignorant the people have been intentionally made. Fortunately, dear viewer, I come with good news. As the years go by, and society only continues to socially and economically collapse under the weight of its foul individualism, the masses will start to reflect, as I have, into how we ended up in this mess in the first place. And as such, collectivism will slowly start to increase in popularity. The truth, ladies and gentlemen, is that this is naught more than a cycle that humanity has seen many times before. With collectivism, we overcome the harshness of nature, and from that comes luxury. From that luxury comes a rise in intellectualism. But with intellectualism comes artificial experimental ideas like individualism. Individualism slowly chips away at society's moral decency until decadence reigns supreme. We are here. From that, society simply starts to slowly break down and decline until the harshness of nature returns and the cycle repeats anew. Collectivism, luxury, intellectualism, individualism, decadence, and decline. Such was the way of the Roman Empire, and such will be the fate of the Western Empire. It is not a matter of whether individualism will die, but what form of collectivism will replace it. I predict that in the future, there will be two clear factions of collectivists in the Western world. First, the losing combo, the social progressives and the economic capitalists, both of which who, upon realizing the rampant individualism is being rejected by the masses and are at risk of being dethroned from power, will unify into one unholy group that, ironically enough, forgets both their values and becomes collectivist in nature. Though rather than being a collective of love, they shall instead be a collective of hate, discriminating against people based on their race and class. Taking the worst aspects of both the fascism and communism they were originally made to destroy, and mixing them together into one toxic cocktail of human misery and despair. On the contrary, however, you shall also have the winning combo, the social conservatives and the economic socialists. Two groups of people who previously despised each other, but will be forced into a marriage of convenience that will ironically blossom into a true romance. Their mutual natural collectivism will unify all of the moral people into one mighty force. A mighty force in which you, dear viewer, will more likely than not belong. Order is coming, folks. It's just a matter of time. Until then, however, try to blow some bubbles. Alright folks, I hope you enjoyed that. My question for you this week is individualism or collectivism? You know, it's so annoying because this is a topic that I really think isn't discussed anywhere near as much as it should be, and whenever it is, I find that it's always people shilling for individualism, which I just think is unbelievable. All I can say is to the people who actually do support individualism, your worldview is going to be torn apart over the next few years and decades, as you will see. The idea of having a groupthink species, as we are programmed to be, and making the centre of society the individual rather than the collective is simply ludicrous. It's unbelievably dumb. But anyway, besides the point, I want to give a shout out to the Wall of Famers. Should I do this in one breath? The wall has got bigger since last time, so you know what, screw it, I'm going to give it a go. Okay, here we go. I want to give a shout out to Siories, My Two Pence, Nemesis 4534, Ardent Word, Craig, Daniel H, Crutonite V, Reginald Scar, Scott Brown, Andrew Hamrick, Philip M, Geometry Dash, Scrophilus Rex, Torfik Madhon, Viriday, Wes FR, Bob Page, King Gold, Stang, Denton, Cassels, Alefashara, BW Gaming, Traeger, Through the Bat, Matthew Easton, Trevor. Jesus Christ, I'm gonna have a heart attack one day doing this, honestly. Either way, wish you all well, and I'll see you next time.